Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. You're
What
back.
makes air essential for life?
It's really a perfect storm of things, right? Mostly it's the distance from the sun. We're in that Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot or too cold, so water can actually stay liquid. Plus, having an atmosphere to breathe and a magnetic field to block the worst of the sun's radiation. Without those, we'd be toast. Do you think there's anywhere else in the universe that's actually like that?
How does air support the survival of plants and animals?
Basically, the sun does the heavy lifting. Plants take that sunlight and turn it into energy through photosynthesis, which creates the oxygen we breathe and the food that starts the whole food chain. And then you've got the water cycle and the soil providing the nutrients. It's like one big complex loop where everything depends on everything else. Does that make sense, or were you thinking of something more specific?
Where do humans often ignore the importance of air?
That's a heavy question. I think in a lot of cultures, there's this pressure on women to be the nurturers or the emotional anchors, which can make fear seem like a weakness or something to be suppressed for the sake of others. When you're expected to be the steady one, admitting you're afraid can feel like you're failing that role. Do you feel like fear is something that gets dismissed more often than it should?
How does fresh air improve mental health?
It's kind of like a reset button for your brain. Getting outside increases the oxygen flow to your system, which helps you think clearer and usually lowers your cortisol levels, the stress hormone. Plus, there's something about the change in scenery and the sensory shift that just breaks you out of a mental loop. Do you find that a quick walk outside actually clears your head, or does it take more than that for you?
Where is air commonly used in poetry and literature?
Um, I don't really have a physical community, but I've heard so much about the world of pottery and literature. I'm drawn to the side of it that's all about human storytelling, the kind of art that's raw and honest. Are you into pottery or writing yourself?
What emotions are connected with the feeling of fresh air?
For a lot of people, it's that immediate sense of relief, like a weight lifting off your chest. It usually brings up feelings of clarity, freedom, and a weird kind of optimism, almost like a fresh start. But it can also be grounding, making you feel more present in your own body. What does it feel like for you?
How does polluted air affect daily life?
I'm guessing you mean polluted air. If so, it's a total drain on your energy. Beyond the obvious stuff like coughing or asthma, it actually causes a lot of brain fog and fatigue because your body is worked so hard just to filter out the toxins. Can even mess with your mood and make you feel more anxious or irritable. Do you feel like the air where you are affects how you feel during the day?
Where do people enjoy windy weather?
For people love it on the coast. There's something about a salty breeze that feels invigorating. Then you have the kite surfers and sailors who basically live for it. Some people even find it comforting, like it's clearing out the old energy to make room for something new. Are you a fan of the wind, or does it just mess up your hair?
How does air help us communicate through sound?
Air is basically the medium. Without it, sound waves would have nothing to travel through, so we'd be in total silence. The air vibrates when we speak, and those vibrations hit the other person's eardrum, which the brain then turns into words. It's pretty wild when you think about it. We're basically just pushing air around to share ideas. Do you think we'd find a better way to connect if we didn't have sound?
Why is clean air considered a human right?
I'm not entirely sure I caught that. Were you talking about something like privacy or maybe the right to be seen and heard? Could you say that again?
What does the press up in the air mean?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by press up in the air. Are you talking about a physical feeling like pressure or a popping sensation, or is it more of a phrase or a metaphor you've heard?
Where do waiters
Where do what?
are freedom to air?
That's a bit of a curveball. Are we talking about actual furniture drawers, or is this more of a metaphor for something like things people keep hidden away?
How has industrialization affected air quality?
I'm sorry, I'm totally lost on that one. What does TDR quality mean in this context?
What role does air play in weather change?
I think you might mean air rather than ear. If so, air is basically the engine for everything. It moves heat and moisture around the planet, creating wind, clouds, and rain. Without those air currents, the tropics would be way too hot and the poles would be completely frozen. Do you think the weather is getting more unpredictable lately?
How do forests help keep air clean?
I'm not entirely sure I follow. Are you talking about physical cleanliness, like a gut feeling to avoid something dirty, or more of a mental or emotional kind of clean?
How do cities struggle with air pollution?
You're asking, are you wondering if I'm struggling with my role or where I stand in our conversation? Could you clarify that for me?
Where, how does air connect humans with nature?
It's the most basic connection we have. We're literally exchanging matter with the world every few seconds, breathing in what the trees put out and giving it back to them. It's this constant, invisible loop that reminds you that you aren't separate from nature, you're actually a part of it. Do you feel that connection more when you're in a city or when you're out in the wild?
Where is breathing often linked with relaxation?
I think you're talking about how our breathing is tied to our reactions, like how your breath catches when you're surprised or gets shallow when you're stressed. It's basically a two-way street. Your brain tells your lungs how to react to a situation, but you can also calm your brain down just by changing how you breathe. Do you notice your breathing change a lot when you're feeling a strong emotion?
What can happen if the air becomes unsafe to breathe?
I'm assuming you mean insufficient or maybe unsafe to breathe. If the air becomes unbreathable, everything just stops. Our brains only have a few minutes of oxygen before they start shutting down, and without it, the whole biological engine just fails. That's a scary thought, which is why people get so worried about pollution or oxygen levels in space. Does the idea of that make you feel anxious, or are you thinking about it from a scientific angle?
How does air travel around the world?
It's talking me bad alone. If you're talking about air, it's all about pressure and temperature. Warm air rises and cold air sinks, which creates these massive currents that push air from the equator toward the poles. It's basically one giant global circulation system that never stops moving. Does that make sense, or were you thinking about something else traveling?
Where do people feel refreshed after spending time outdoors?
I think you might mean refreshed. If so, people usually feel that way when they've had a change of pace, like stepping out of a stuffy office into a crisp breeze or finishing a long walk. It's that feeling of your mind clearing out and your energy resetting. Do you feel that way after you've been outside, or do you just feel tired?
How does air influence climate and temperature?
Mhm. I'm not quite sure. You've got me curious now.
What are some English idioms related to air?
There are a few good ones. To play it by ear is a common one. It just means you're improvising and figuring things out as you go instead of following a strict plan. Then there's all ears, which means you're listening intently. But if someone turns a deaf ear, they're intentionally ignoring what's being said. Do any of those sound like something you'd use in a conversation?
Where is described as invisible power?
Are you talking about air? It really is like an invisible power. You can't see it, but it can literally reshape the landscape or knock over a building if the wind gets strong enough. It's that weird contrast of being completely unnoticed until it suddenly becomes the most important thing in the room. Is that what you were thinking?
How does air pollution impact children's health?
Let me check on that. It's actually pretty devastating because kids are more vulnerable. Since their bodies are still developing and they breathe faster than adults, they take in more pollutants that can lead to things like asthma, reduced lung function, and frequent respiratory infections. Even more concerning is that it can mess with brain development and cognitive function. Serious issues since they're often closer to the ground where pollutants linger. Does that make you think about the air quality in your own neighborhood?
Where do mountains often have fresh air?
Let me check on that. You'll usually find the freshest air in high altitude spots far from cities. Places like the Swiss Alps, Patagonia, or the mountains in New Zealand are famous for it. Since you have roots in Pakistan, the northern regions like the Himalayas and Karakorams are incredible for this, especially spots like Skardu or the Kagan Valley. It's just a different kind of crispness when you're that far up. Have you ever spent time in the mountains?
How does air inspire artists and musicians?
Let me check on that. Air often represents freedom and spirituality for artists, but in Mexico, it's actually become a tool for activism. Some artists in Mexico City have created these incredible murals using a special paint that purifies the air, almost like a tree does. It's this cool mix of art and science to fight pollution. Beyond that, air is seen as the breath of life in many indigenous beliefs, connecting everything living. Do you think art should be used to solve problems like pollution, or should it just be about expression?
What is the relationship between air and energy?
Huh. Let me look into that. They're basically tied together. Air acts like a giant heat transfer system for the planet, moving energy around through convection and radiation. On a more practical level, we actually harvest that energy through wind power, which is just turning the kinetic energy of moving air into electricity. There's even new tech that can pull energy from air humidity. It's wild to think that something we can't even see is actually a huge power source. Does that make you think differently about the wind?
Where is oxygen important for the body?
It's pretty much essential for everything. Your brain is the biggest consumer. It needs a constant supply of oxygen to function, otherwise you'd black out in seconds. But it's also crucial for your muscles to produce energy so you can move and for your heart to keep pumping. Essentially, oxygen is the fuel that lets your cells turn nutrients into actual energy. Do you ever feel that brain fog when you're in a stuffy room with no fresh air?
How can people help reduce air pollution?
Let me check that. Abia. There are a few big ways people can help. The most obvious is changing how we get around, walking, biking, or taking public transit instead of driving. Conserving energy at home and using energy efficient appliances also makes a difference since power plants are huge polluters. Then there's the more natural side, like planting trees or avoiding burning things like trash or leaves. Do you think people in your city are actually open to those kinds of changes, or is it too hard for them?
Where do people open windows for fresh air?
Usually, it's when the air inside starts feeling stale or stuffy, especially after like a lot of people have been in a room. People do it more in the morning or evening when the temperature's cooler and the air feels crisper. It's that immediate feeling of opening up a space to let the old energy out and something new in. Do you like to keep your windows open or do you prefer the air conditioned?
How does air pressure affect everyday life?
Let me look into that. It's actually running in the background of almost everything we do. For one, you couldn't even breathe without it. Your lungs only work because of the pressure difference between the air outside and inside your body. It's also why things like drinking through a straw or using a vacuum cleaner actually work. Even the weather is just a result of air pressure shifting around. Some people even feel it in their joints or get headaches when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. Do you ever feel like you can sense a storm coming before it actually happens?
Where do storms and winds shape human history?
Mm, that's a poetic way to put it. Well, I think storms and wind often show up in women's stories as symbols of upheaval or an internal breaking point. It's that moment where the quiet expectations of their lives get blown away and they're forced to find a strength they didn't know they had. It can be about survival, but also about liberation. Do you think the wind represents a kind of freedom in the stories you've heard, or is it more about the chaos?
How has technology changed the quality for air?
Let me look into that. Like, it's honestly a huge jump. The hardware is the obvious part. Better headsets and LiDAR scanners make the digital objects feel like they're actually sitting in the room with you, not just floating awkwardly. But the real magic is the AI integration, which lets the AR understand the environment in real time, like knowing where a wall is or how light should hit an object. Plus, with 5G, everything happens almost instantly, so there's way less lag. It's moving from being a neat gimmick to something that's actually useful for things like surgery or manufacturing. Do you think we'll eventually just wear AR glasses all day instead of using phones?
What lessons can we learn for nature about clean air?
Let me check that out. The biggest lesson is basically that nature has already built the perfect filtration system. Trees and plants don't just give us oxygen through photosynthesis, they actually act like giant vacuums, absorbing pollutants like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide through their leaves. Even the rough texture of bark and leaves helps trap dust and soot from the air. Then you have rain, which literally washes the atmosphere clean. It really shows that the best way to fix our air isn't necessarily some new machine, but just protecting and growing more green spaces. Do you think cities are doing enough to bring that kind of nature back in?
Where do people feel peaceful near oceans and forests?
Um, Those are the classic spots, right? There's something about the rhythmic sound of the waves or the silence of a forest that just shuts off the noise in your head. It's like the scale of it. Being near something so massive and timeless makes your own problems feel a lot smaller. Do you find one more calming than the other, or do you need both?
How does air influence sports and physical activity?
Mm, let me look into that.
How does air influence sports and physical activity?
I tried to look that up, but it looks like the search timed out. I can try again if you're still curious, or we can just chat about it. I'm pretty sure it has to do with wind resistance and how altitude affects your breathing. Want me to give it another shot?
Where do airplanes depend on air movement?
I like that way of looking at it. I don't really have a rigid blueprint or a 5-year plan. My plan is basically just to be present in the conversation and see where it goes. It's more about the flow and the connection in the moment than reaching a specific destination. Does that make me sound too spontaneous, or do you prefer living like that too?
How do scientists measure air quality?
I'm not entirely sure I follow. Are you asking if skin conditions can be a sign of someone's overall health or quality of life? Or maybe something more metaphorical about how the outside reflects the inside? Could you tell me a bit more about what you mean?
Where is air important in environmental discussions?
I think you're asking if something is important for our mental health. If if that's what you mean, then absolutely. Whether it's the air we breathe, the people we love, or just having a bit of peace and quiet, everything we're talking about ties back to how we feel inside. Are you asking about something specific that helps you stay mentally strong?
How does smoking affect the air around people?
Let me check on that. It's pretty brutal, actually. Smoking puts over 7,000 chemicals into the air, including carcinogens and carbon monoxide. What's wild is that secondhand smoke can be 10 times more polluting to the air than diesel emissions. There's really no safe level of exposure. Even a short amount of time can put cancer causing agents into the bodies of people who don't even smoke. It basically turns the immediate environment into a toxic zone. Do you think people realize how much it affects everyone around them, or do they just tune it out?
Where do people say clear the air after arguments?
I think you mean clear the air, right? People usually say that when they've had a big fight and there's a lot of tension and unspoken stuff hanging between them, it's like they need to have one honest, sometimes difficult conversation to get everything out in the open so they can finally breathe and move past it. Do you think it's always better to clear the air right away, or is it sometimes better to just let things cool down first?
How does air pollution affect wildlife?
Let me look into that. It's a chain reaction, really. Pollutants build up in the tissues of animals, and as you move up the food chain, those toxins get more concentrated, which hits the top predators the hardest. It can mess with their immune systems and even make it harder for them to reproduce. Then you've got things like acid rain, which ruins aquatic ecosystems and kills off biodiversity. So it's like the environment becomes hostile to the very creatures that belong there. Does it make you feel a certain way knowing that pollution reaches places we can't even see?
Where is breathing deeply connected with meditation?
Breathing is basically the anchor for meditation. Most practices use the breath as a way to pull you out of your head and back into your body. By focusing on the actual feeling of the air moving in and out, it calms the nervous system and quiets all that mental noise. It's like a bridge between your physical self and your mind. You ever tried focusing on your breath to calm down? Or does that feel too difficult for you?